Good afternoon, sir. Ambassador. Yes?
Yes, yes.
Good afternoon, Ambassador. We are here at the UN 80, and this is your 15th General Assembly, right?
Yes, and good afternoon.
Yeah.
And nice having me on air. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Adonia. Now, I want to ask, this is your 15th UN General Assembly. Does this year feel any different?
Yeah, each year is different, but this is different in many respects. I mean, what is going on in the world? You know, how many wars? 3 wars that we are focusing on, and others forgotten. And the climate crisis. We are not getting along in the world. So this is really, and also the number of leaders that have turned up.
The number of what?
Of leaders, heads of states and government is really big. So this is different in a way.
Okay. And part of what is happening, we'll talk about the different conflicts. So we can actually start there.
Yes.
One of the conflicts, of course, is the war in Gaza and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The UN has found that there is a genocide going on there. But previously, Uganda supported the New York resolution. You voted yes.
Yes.
And you said it was an important stance to take for Uganda. Why?
It was important in many respects. I mean, something has to be done to the humanitarian situation in Gaza, but also the resolution of the conflict in Palestine. And Uganda supports the two-state solution as the only way out. And we have had that principled position for years, but now it's most important, urgent. You know, address the humanitarian situation, but also have a political solution. So that's why we voted for the declaration. But also Uganda chairs the non-aligned movement, you know, which it was set up to make sure that we end decolonization. And Palestine is the last vestige of colonization that is visible. So we are really we supported it out of our principle of non-alignment.
Yes, you led the non-alignment movement, but you also led the group of 77.
Yes, last year.
Yeah, that is about South-South cooperation.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And very interestingly, so you supported Uganda's nominee for the International Court of Justice. And when South Africa brought a case against Israel, there was only one judge that voted against every single item. Even an Israeli nominee voted for two of those items. The judge was the Uganda representative.
Yes, I mean, you're correct. I actually campaigned her as an ambassador twice for her. Her first term, 9 years. 9 years later, fate brought us together again here, and I campaigned for her. I mean, she's a judge. She can do what she wants, but Uganda has nothing to do with her decisions. And once the judgment came out, I came out publicly and said, that's not Uganda's position. It is her own decision as a judge. You know, talking personally, was I happy about it? No, because of the confusion it created, thinking that that was Uganda's position. It was not. It was her position, and she will have to explain it.
I mean, it's been reported that she said in a church in Uganda that she did it for God, and some people are calling for her removal. Are you going to support her staying on the ICJ?
I mean, we don't have power to remove her. We don't have. Once she's there, she's there. She was elected by all the member states. Really, I don't want to get involved into the controversy it has caused. I mean, she's in the court of public opinion. You know, she has supporters, she has opponents, but most importantly, she's a judge doing her thing. But do I agree with it? Personally, no.
Now, if we're talking about different crises in the world, there's the Russia-Ukraine war. We mentioned Gaza, the situation in Gaza, and we haven't touched on Sudan.
Yes.
Some people say that it's a forgotten crisis. Do you think that when the issue is African crises, whether it's in Eastern DRC or in Sudan, that it takes a back burner? And also just following on from that, because African nations are now actively campaigning for a seat on the UN Security Council. Sierra Leone's president said that a lot of the matters in front of the council are African matters, but we don't have a permanent seat. Do you think that those things are tied, how we treat wars or conflicts on the international stage when it comes to Africa, and the fact that we do not have a seat, a permanent seat on the UN Security Council?
I mean, it's really morally irreprehensible that we are not addressing the crisis in Sudan. I mean, it's top among, you can talk about Gaza, talk about Ukraine. Look at the level of humanitarian crisis. 12 million people displaced, over 200,000 dead, and still counting, and it's not on top of the agenda. I think it's our job, really. It's Africa's agency. We, as representatives of Africa here, and here, we work as Africans. I don't work as Uganda's representative. I do sometimes, but we work as a group. We become effective when we work as a group. We have 3 non-permanent members on the Security Council. We call them the A3. They have really worked hard to make sure that African crises are on the agenda, top of the agenda of the Security Council. But you are right. I mean, we would be more effective and respected if we had permanent seats. And Uganda happens to be a member of the Committee of 10 of African countries that are pushing for the reform of the Security Council. And we had a summit chaired by Sierra Leone, which really retaliated. Now we have the African model of reform on the table, which has garnered support. I think the Security Council, the way it is, I mean, it's not fit for purpose. I mean, it's like a company. I mean, the shareholders have changed. I mean, the UN was formed when there were 50 member states.
Yes.
Now we are almost 200. Look here, even school classes grow, the number of students grow, and you have to respond effectively. I mean, the UN has to respond to the reality of this century. And Africa, I mean, has to be represented on the Security Council. That will help us to really make sure that African agendas are paid, attention is paid. So Sudan, forgotten, but also we have the Sahel.
Yes, of course.
We have Eastern DRC. We cannot, we can't have appetite when it comes to addressing crisis in the world. I mean, we have said no.
You've said about how in 1945, when the UN Charter was signed, it was 50 countries. A lot of African countries were still under colonization at that point in time. Now they are nations of their own. The Nigerian vice president said that if the UN wants to retain its relevance, it must deal with African nations properly. It has to deal with the world as it is, not as it was. And President Ruto of Kenya also said that you can't call yourself the United Nations if you ignore 54 of those nations. Now, I want us to talk a little bit more about that. Do you believe, because you said the Security Council is maybe running like a company, but do you believe the UN itself is running effectively or is being used effectively to actually reach its goals?
Look at the issues of the day, the important issues of the day globally. We mentioned about Gaza,
yes,
Ukraine, Sudan, even climate, and even the crisis of the century, which was the pandemic. The UN never took the lead. So the UN really needs a reality check to be relevant. I mean, we all believe in the UN. I'm not saying we should do away with the UN, but things have changed, and the UN is as good as its member states. We are the shareholders.
Yes.
We need to ask the hard questions. I mean, every leader that stood up there says, look here, the UN needs to reform. So but what kind of reform?
I was going to say, including Donald Trump, who...
Absolutely,
He said that climate change is a hoax.
I mean, you can have problems with how it is being addressed, but the science is clear. That is a problem. But you can have issues. I mean, I chair the subsidiary body on climate change that deals with science and technological advice, in short, SUBSTA. Really, the science is very clear, but again, the hypocrisy. I mean, he was right in a way, the hypocrisy how climate change is addressed by developed countries. I mean, who pollutes? They are the polluter. There is a principle in international law clearly. The polluter pays.
Yes.
But I mean, when it comes to financing for climate finance, it's really now the goalposts are being shifted. People talk about the role of the private sector, but the Paris Agreement and the UN Convention on Climate Change says funds, public funds, not private sector funds, will flow from developed to developing countries. But new phrases outside the legal framework, international legal, are being introduced. Domestic resource mobilization, basically washing their responsibility off the climate crisis. That's where the UN has, funding of peacekeeping missions. They are ghettoizing the debate that, things like hiding things like, okay, African solutions to African problems doesn't mean that the world should wash its hands off Africa. It's international peace and security, but we see more. Uganda is a troop contributor to the Somalia, but funds are being cut at a critical time when we need to stabilize countries like Somalia. The Sahel, the same. Even before you mention Sudan, the humanitarian funding down, refugees, internally displaced people. So really the double standards, the UN belongs to all of us, and Africa has done its share. Look at your own country, Nigeria. The history, we don't talk about Nigeria stabilizing Liberia and Sierra Leone.
Yes.
Through deploying ECOMOG.
Yes. And funding.
And funding it.
Yes.
I think the question, is we need to really address ourselves. If the world is washing itself away, should we fold our hands? No. Nigeria did it. We can do it by addressing our peacekeeping needs. We can keep on shaming and naming, but doing stuff. I think there is a need for African leaders, and the debate is already coming up. What can we do for ourselves?
Definitely. As you said, Nigeria did it with ECOMOG in Sierra Leone and Liberia, but also, very importantly, Nigeria also helped support the FPLA in Angola, and also chaired the anti-apartheid committee here in the UN, and supported the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa.
Absolutely.
So Nigeria has had this history of trying to support its neighbors, and particularly across sub-Saharan Africa.
And we need Nigeria's leadership. Nigeria is the most populous country on the continent, and they say out of 5 Africans will be Nigerians.
5 black people.
Nigerian.
Yes.
So we need your leadership. We need Nigerians' leadership. And over the years, Nigeria has taken leadership, and we need South Africa's leadership. We need Uganda's leadership. We need everybody's leadership. But so really, where is African agents? And I think African agents are coming on the table. We are part now. The African Union is part of the G20.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at, the Security Council has a problem. The G7 had. Because it's not expanding. It remains static. Even when I use the word shareholders expand and change. But the G20 maybe is a model because it responds to evolving needs. It involves more countries, as it goes on. So we need to look at reform holistically.
Do you think it's significant that the G20 is going to be held for the first time in Africa this November?
This is really very significant that our South African friends are hosting it, and they need our support so that Africa can put its priorities on the table. But again, as I said, the African Union that represents all of us also has a seat. It's very important.
Was the African Union living up to its promise?
Again, I'm not sentimentally disconnected from the African Union. The African Union is as good again as its member states. Which African Union are you talking about? The Commission or the Assembly? I think we need to make the African Union meet its purpose. Its founders again, President Obasanjo, President Mbeki, President Wade of Senegal, when they envisaged an African Union that was different from the OAU.
Yes.
That was more robust in addressing African issues. So we need to build on their vision and make sure it's funded. It also responds to needs of, realistically to the needs of the continent, both peace and security, development, so that it can be respected globally. And it is respected, but we need we need to fund it and, fight really terrorism, Al-Shabaab and others. So So we have also done it in South Sudan. So the question is commitment, political will, that when we stabilize an African country, it is economically beneficial to the whole region. I mean, let's start as a sub-region, ECOWAS, SADC. You have to, I'm not, I don't encourage hegemonies, in the sense of Nigeria and South Africa, but also countries that can take a lead.
Yeah.
Look at Rwanda, what they have done in Mozambique.
Well, if we look at the DRC, SADC pulled out of the DRC and, alleged that Rwanda did not. If you look at ECOWAS, we have 3 countries that have left ECOWAS. So, we're speaking about African unity, and Africa has to work together. If we look at the crisis in Eastern DRC, SADC did go there, and they pulled out. And if we look at ECOWAS, 3 countries have pulled out, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, and they formed their own sub-regional bloc, the AES, the Alliance of Sahel States. Do you think that Africa might be moving in the wrong direction at this point?
No. I think there can be uncoordinated movement of troops, if I may use that word, and regionalism really should be anchored in reality of what is going on. I mean, look at the principles of African Union and ECOWAS when it comes to unconstitutional change of government, to coups. But we need to really take a step back. When we did those charters, I mean, some coups are really not coups unconstitutional. They reflect the reality on the ground. We need to be flexible in the way we address. It shouldn't be like knee-jerk reaction, not knee-jerk reaction, okay. Like applying the rules because something has happened. If there is a coup in country X, I mean, we should really be able to do an analysis and say, what is going on there? But just suspending a country for the sake of it, I mean, what I see from a distance in West Africa, in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, is that there was a reality on the ground. The so-called elected leaders and what, there was a problem. And these coups were organic from the community. And I think, of course, ECOWAS had to apply the rules. I'm not criticizing ECOWAS. They had to apply the rules. But now I'm sure there is reflection. I've seen the president of Sierra Leone, who is the current chair of ECOWAS, visiting those countries. Maybe there is a dialogue to say, how can we work together? How can we help you? How can we? I mean, that is then when it comes to peacekeeping operations, like you mentioned South Africa and SADC in DRC, I think it was not a neat job. I think they should, DRC is both SADC and ESC. You remember there was an ESC force in DRC?
Yes.
I think there was no coordination between the 2 bodies. And these organizations, this architecture, the African Peace and Architecture, is new, it's fairly new. It's work in progress. We keep on perfecting it. I think that's where the crisis was. You found ECOWAS going head-to-head with the ESC, because that's the neighborhood of the East African community. But what I like is that for the first time, this year there was a joint summit. Joint summit, the first one, between ESC and SADC, and they addressed the situation in DRC, Eastern DRC, at the heads of state level, and really worked out a mechanism of coordination. I think what we need is coordination. But we have no choice. We have to address this crisis. Yeah.
We do. And, when we look at some of these things, because you did say that some of these things appear organic, but some people also feel that it is still foreign powers meddling in African affairs. That is, we're dealing with foreign powers coming into Africa, particularly when it comes to our resources that do not necessarily benefit our nations, but are extracted, exploited, and taken somewhere else. Do you think that we are still dealing in some ways with neocolonialism?
Absolutely, in different shapes and forms. I think the foreigners will always be there to take advantage of the continent. But this is why we need institutions like sub-regional bodies, or even strong states. I mean, a strong state will not be easily calling on foreign troops who will protect its resources.
Yes.
I think we need strong states.
And I think also maybe strong statesmen Because you have
Absolutely.
you pointed out Nigeria in the past, and Obasanjo, for example. You also saw Abdul Salami. Our past leaders had a lot of investment in the trajectory of other nations in Africa. But also, I was recently speaking about the OAU and the speech given there by Murtala Mohammed, who was the head of state in Nigeria. And it was called Africa Has Come of Age. And it was in response to foreign pressure, particularly when it came to anti-apartheid and Angola's independence struggle. Do you think we're lacking that type of leadership currently?
I think, to be fair, each generation produces its leadership. But what remains constant is the need for a strong continent. And I'm sure you're from Nigeria. I'm sure Nigeria needs a peaceful West Africa and a peaceful Africa. I mean, and then leaders have to respond out of even self-interest to that reality, that if you need a strong, peaceful, prosperous continent, leadership in countries like Nigeria and others have to invest in that. Invest in terms of diplomacy, in terms of peacekeeping and peacemaking. I think you have no choice. Look at your own banks across the continent. Look how countries like Nigeria, but you have to invest. I think there needs to be a reflection among current leaders on the continent. And I think we have an institution called the African Union. It really provides good founding documents. What is needed is to leaders to pay attention to that and lead.
Do you think it's harmful that Nigeria, because Nigeria currently doesn't have diplomats, I don't think we have a representative at the UN currently.
I'm not going to really, I know I'm a diplomat. I don't speak about other countries. But
I'm saying, are you missing us?
Yes, we do. I mean, we know where I would want every African country to be. The countries send their best here.
Yes.
And Nigeria has a history. I mean, Bande, who was my colleague, Professor Bande, we presented credentials the same day. He rose to lead us. He became the president of the General Assembly. Before him, Joy Ogo, she led on the Security Council. Nigerian diplomats have led. We cannot afford a vacuum of Nigeria not, having an ambassador here at the UN, because we work as an African group. Let me tell you, we have the numbers. I mean, you mentioned that I chaired the group of 77, 134 countries, and now I'm chairing NAM. The entire Global South, I've had a privilege of. But let me tell you, among NAM G77, Africa has the majority. And, if Africa is not effective in those Global South forums, it weakens our position. And of course, at the UN, the entire UN. When the African group catches the cold, everybody sneezes in New York. But we need ambassadors. We need strong colleagues that can push African common positions.
Take you very much. And NAM is holding their conference soon, right? Yeah,
the mid-term ministerial conference is in Kampala, where we are going to really take stock of what has happened for the last 1 year and a half, and be able to move, as we move to the next summit of NAM, end of next year in Uzbekistan, when Uganda hands over its chairmanship. We have done it well on behalf of Africa. Africa chose us to chair NAM, and I think we have really led, NAM and the group of 77. The Global South has changed since the 60s. We have nuclear powers.
Oh, wow.
We have big economies. So really it's a big block. And we talk about South-South cooperation, even economically. Let me tell you, South-South cooperation, is now a real option when it comes to funding for development. The traditional partners are pulling out, but we can really pull resources from the Global South. Look at Southeast Asia. $6.5 trillion economies, and they want to work with Africa. Well, we need institutional mechanism to do that. We need our own banks. We need an effective UN to really coordinate South-South cooperation.
And proper infrastructure in our countries.
Absolutely. Look at, I was talking today somebody about Ethiopian Airlines. Ethiopian Airlines is the airline of the Global South. It goes to Asia. It goes to the Middle East. It takes Africa to the world. I think that's the kind of infrastructure we need, of course, apart from road network in Africa, but we need airlines.
Speaking about Ethiopia, they just built the largest hydropower dam in Africa. Yes. And I believe you studied water?
Yeah, international water law and transboundary water resources.
Okay, so if we're talking about mechanisms and international water law, if we're talking about Ethiopia, because what they've done is incredible. 15 years to accomplish something that's very incredible and has the potential to take 60% of their nation out of electricity.
Absolutely, 64 million people.
64 million people. If we're thinking about that, but there's also been some type of pushback from Egypt.
Absolutely.
Is it those type of situations, should the solution not be African-led?
Absolutely. When the misunderstanding between Ethiopia and Egypt started, it started. The African Union intervened. I think President Ramaphosa was appointed to really make sure that he mediates and looks at the issues between the two countries. But unfortunately, it even ended in the UN as a threat to international peace and security. And of course, the vote was held. Didn't succeed, didn't get enough votes. But we don't need to do that. I think international law is very clear. The problem with Uganda comes from that region is that we have the comprehensive framework agreement. But unfortunately, not all countries support it. A river like that is the longest river in the world. Starts from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean, but it has no treaty. So there are no rules of how that water can be shared sustainably. And I think we need an understanding, we need diplomacy. And water diplomacy is another frontier. Water is going to be scarce, fresh water, as we go forward. I looked at West Africa. You have institution, the Senegambia, the river, the transboundary water resources, they are really well defined, and you have institutional framework that needs to be strengthened. Maybe we can learn from that.
Well, thank you very much, sir. I think I have one more question and then we're going to go. It's, as you said, the traditional funders are pulling out, but it seems that the world has shifted completely. It's not just East versus West anymore. You have a lot of middle powers, even in Asia, as you said, the Arab countries. Do you think Africa is rising to the occasion in this multipolar world order?
Absolutely, that's a fantastic question. I think people say, you are the chair of NAM, how do you respond to this? Yeah. I always say that now we should change it to all aligned. Because we need to be strategic. We need to deal with all the partners. Yeah. We have to define our interests. If our interest is development and infrastructure and peace and security, we need to deal with whoever, the Americans, the Europeans, the Asians, whoever can address our interests. So we need to be flexible, and I think we are not yet there, but Africa needs to do that. Not the old alliances, they cannot work. We need to define our interests and deal with whoever. When people talk about China, we have to relate with China like, they're our friends, yes. But we need to relate with them based on our interests, our well-defined interests. And if we agree, well and good. So I think Africa, to really survive this, multipolar world, we need to really be strategic and deal with whoever, and deal with them as Africa, not as individual countries. Otherwise, if you deal with them as individual countries, they will tear us apart one by one. One voice will be respected.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
We're talking about Africa has to deal with new times, a new world order, new energy. We are the youngest population in the world. But as you said, every generation has its leaders, but it seems the old generation is still leading us, including in your country.
Including in your country.
Are these old generation of leaders? Because at least in Nigeria, he's new.
It is, okay.
He's still new.
Yeah, he's still new.
He just got here, but in your country, it's been decades of the same.
Yeah, and I think it's not about biology. It's about ideology and ideas.
Okay.
So long as there are regular elections, I think I will not get worried. Because if there is an opportunity for the population to either vote you in, vote you out, well and good. And each country is unique. And Africa is not a country. It's a continent. Each one is different histories. And so they can't, so long as there is institutional framework of changing leaders through regular elections.
Regular, free, and fair elections.
I don't know whether there are free elections anymore in the world, but they are regular.
To be honest, he's so happy in America. So
Exactly.
I don't know how much of a response after that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.